Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Midweek Worship at Two Cities Church. I want to thank you for joining us. My name is Jeff, and you found our digital middle of the week broadcast. Now, if this is brand new to you, after this episode is over with, if you look in the notes, you'll see a link to a YouTube video. You can check that video out right after we're done. It's only a couple of minutes long, and it will tell you more about what this broadcast is all about and where we're at. For those of you who are regulars, though, you know that just last week we started talking about this word that nobody likes to say in the English language, but it doesn't mean that it's not true. We're talking about the word sin. And last week we described how sin is ultimately failing to live up to perfection, failing to be the kind of person that Jesus was every day of our lives. It's ultimately missing the mark. Well, I want us to look at what sin does starting today and how it robs us of something. Today we're going to look at losing our innocence. Now, we're in this theological topic of sin, and sin is set by the creator of the universe, the God who created us, who sets the standard on what he expects from the people that he created, and God decides what the rules are. We don't. God also declares, and we don't have a voice or a vote here, God declares what equals sin and what doesn't equal sin. He decides when we don't meet the standard. And last week what we saw is every human being that's ever set foot on planet Earth, except for the one born of a virgin who was tempted in every way like we are, yet without sin, all the rest of us have failed to live up to God's standard. Back in the Garden of Eden, what God created when he first made human beings is he made these two pure, perfect people. And he gave them absolute control and total freedom. Do whatever you want to do, have whatever you want to have, eat whatever you want to eat, hang out wherever you want to hang out. There's only one rule, and God gave them this rule so that they could show him that they love him, not forcing them to love him, but allowing them to love him. He gave them one rule, and the one rule was don't eat from one tree. There's lots of trees, lots of good trees in the garden to eat from, but there's one tree that's off limits, and I don't even need to tell you, you don't even need to read the Bible to know what happens if parents give their children total freedom and only one restriction. You know it, because I would do it too. You're eventually going to break that one rule, which is what Adam and Eve did. The backstory here is that Adam and Eve are in the Garden of Eden, and we don't know how long they're around the Garden of Eden before they're tricked by the serpent. They have a conversation with the serpent, and the conversation starts off subtly, and it always does that when it comes to temptation. It always seems subtle, and then it goes from subtle to severe, and it usually happens right away. The serpent said, "Hey, did God really say you can't eat from any of the trees?" And of course, Eve said, no, that's not right. God said we can eat from whatever we want, just not that one tree. And then the serpent just directly challenged Eve and Adam and said, no, God's not a good father to you. Because if he was a good father, he wouldn't withhold good stuff from you. And God's holding something back, because if you eat this tree, the fruit from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, then you're going to be like God. And what the serpent was doing is tricking them. Now, God never said what the results would be in their hearts if they ate from the tree. But he did warn them, if you eat this tree, you will die. And the serpent even challenged that. So then Eve takes a look at the fruit and she notices that it looks good. She has her husband standing right there with her, and instead of telling her to stop, instead of protecting her, he allows this to go on. Eve eventually eats the fruit and she hands it to her husband, who the Bible says is right there with her, and he eats. And then I want to show you on the screen the very next verse, immediately after they eat the fruit. Notice, the serpent has just said, God's not a good God. If he was a good God, he'd let you eat all of the good stuff. And look at how good this fruit looks. And by the way, there's some good stuff that goes along with this fruit. And if you were to eat this good stuff, you would become like God. And he's holding good stuff back from you. And then I want you to see in Genesis chapter 3, verse 7, exactly what happens next. In fact, I'm going to put it on the screens, and I'm going to ask you to memorize this one verse this week. Here it is, Genesis chapter 3, verse 7. Then the eyes of both of them were opened, and they knew that they were naked. So they sewed fig leaves together and made coverings for themselves. Genesis chapter 3, verse 7 describes immediately the very next thing that happens. The serpent was saying, it's going to be awesome if you eat this fruit, and the fruit's going to taste awesome, and your life is going to be awesome. And immediately after they ate that fruit, it wasn't awesome. In fact, it went from awesome to awful immediately after eating that fruit, because now they started to hide themselves. And I personally believe they're hiding themselves from one another right now, because Eve is noticing that she's naked. Adam is noticing for the first time in their life that he's naked. And to cover up their nakedness, they sew some fig leaves together to hide the human body from one another. If you have ever been around a toddler, they have no reservation whatsoever about taking off all of their clothes and running around with nothing on, and they don't feel any embarrassment about it. They don't feel any shame about it. They are totally innocent, and they don't feel any shame about their nakedness. You see, what happened in the Garden of Eden is Adam and Eve, and this is hard for us to get our minds around, every human being that would ever come after Adam and Eve lost their innocence. We lost our innocence when Adam and Eve made a conscious decision to eat that fruit. And when I say lose our innocence, that's hard for us to grasp all that that means. So what I want to do is show you a description of what the word innocent in the Old Testament Hebrew means. If you look on the screens, you'll see that there's a range of meanings here, but I think it's fascinating that some of those meanings is that you are marked, that you are spotted, that you are stained or soiled, meaning that you're no longer pure, that you're no longer without any blemish whatsoever. Old Testament language, innocent, means the same thing that it does in the New Testament language of Greek. But I want you to look at this picture, because in the Greek language, the word innocent is even more profound, because it's the idea of being without shame, being without guilt. And if you were to put those two together, the Hebrew idea of innocence, the Greek idea of innocence, what you have in the Bible is Adam and Eve being without shame, without guilt, without any fear, without any reservation, kind of like a toddler running around with no clothes on in front of everybody in the world and feeling no guilt about it whatsoever, because there's nothing inside of them to make them feel like they should be ashamed. It's not until we force clothes on them that toddlers decide to start wearing clothes. But it's also more than that. You see, I wore this black shirt today to make you think about the idea of a crystal clear, perfectly white t-shirt. And then it gets a stain on it. Now, you can wash it, you can work on that stain, you can do your best, and you can make that stain start to go away. But no matter how hard you try, if it's perfectly white, forever that shirt will have a little mark on it where it used to be white, but now it's no longer perfectly white. And that's really the idea of innocence in the Bible. It's the idea that I'm no longer completely and totally white. There are some areas of my life that are white, but there's a lot of areas of my life that have marker and stain and blood and a mess on them, and I made that mess. Nobody else can take the blame for it. When the artist tried to depict what this would look like, in their minds, it naturally went back to children. In fact, there's a famous work of art in England by a brilliant British master painter, and this is an image of Samuel, the child of Hannah, delivered to the temple, who's still a young boy and he's still innocent, and Samuel is hearing from God, and Samuel is relating to God in pure innocence, and the picture is a description of innocence. When adults think about innocence, they always go back to what life was like before they got stained, before they missed the mark, before there was a blemish on them, and they started to experience guilt and shame for the first time. You see, I don't think that I have the right words to help you figure out what a loss of innocence looks like, because I don't know that any of us could completely comprehend what it would be like to be totally and absolutely innocent the way Adam and Eve were innocent in the Garden of Eden. We have moments of our life, or at periods of our life, where we were more innocent than afterwards. But anybody who's ever been hurt, anybody who's ever been burned, anybody who's ever had something bad happen to them knows there's nothing anyone on the planet can do that can make the results of that go away. I can work through it, I can get better, but I can never go back to the person that I was before that incident, because I've lost it. I've lost that innocence. Which is why I want to ask you a question, and this question is designed for you to think about as we wrap up this broadcast today. It's a question that if you will stop and put a little thought into, it might be very profound for you. So here it is. What would be different in your life today, very specifically, if you were completely innocent? What it would be like with no shame, no guilt, no fear, no sense of remorse, nothing stopping you from being absolutely and totally fearless and who you are and who you've been created to be, with every single person around you in every situation, in every relationship. Can you even picture in your mind what that might be like? Because that's what we all lost when our first parents committed that first sin, and now no human being is innocent anymore. But there is a day coming in the future where God will restore our innocence, where there will be, according to the book of Revelation, no more tears, no more pain, no more suffering, and no more death, because all of the old stuff that goes along with sin and its effects have been washed away. So I hope this episode today has caused you to think a little bit deeper about the real impact that sin leaves for generations. Thank you for joining me. We'll be back here next week and we'll pick this conversation right back up. See you next time.